Good morning, teachers. We are in the midst of my fall term. I work with the Silicon Forest. I work asynchronously mostly, but by Silicon Forest, I mean something like, say, from Corvallis to Bellevue, Washington, somewhere in there. And so I do meet you guys. We drive to various locations. Um, like We bump into each other sometimes. It's not even planned sometimes. We have meetups, we talk on Zoom, and I talk on Zoom outside of, just Silicon Forest, of course. There's a lot of meetups that I jump in on sometimes. So this is not like a lot of people have sent me money and that we're all like on the same page exactly. It's more when I teach a course, I just disseminate it on several levels, right? So if you're kind of lurking and you wonder, are there meetups that you're not seeing and relationships behind the scenes and all that? Of course. Like there's a lot going on besides just these YouTubes. But I think if you want to get into this work, then just start stealing these ideas or using these ideas. For example, right? This is very Bucky Fuller oriented. Consider this like Bucky for high school could be a title, just under informally. And one thing we take up is globalism, nationalism, the history of all these ideas. And Fuller, fairly boldly and with a lot of fanfare in major magazines, introduced the world to what he calls the Dymaxion map here. So let's see how that's going to look. There it is behind my head, right? You've probably seen this, but maybe not, because there's a lot of work done to not have it be in the schools. But like I say, around here in the Silicon Forest, we've had that very map in Cleveland High School. We've talked about Fuller's modules, like the A and the B modules. If you know anything about the geometry that goes on here, Winter Haven, we did an all sixth grade assembly and we built A modules and assembled them into a tetrahedron, stuff like that. And I've been doing it for years, and Saturday Academy and all this kind of stuff. So, yeah, around here in the Silicon Forest, given my age and the number of generations of students I've worked with, there's a lot of, I'm not taking full credit for this. I'm saying this is kind of embedded in our culture that we think maybe a little differently sometimes. Now, beware, you're going to come across some quack literature where they say things like, Bucky Fuller was not an architect or something. And, we have Powell's books here in Portland, so all I have to do is get a book like this and look up Buckminster Fuller and see all the awards and all the accolades. And of course, he's an architect, right? But there are trial balloons out there where they're trying to, like, always trying to diminish Bucky. It's a concerted campaign. It's not like organized by any one person, but it's an attempt to sort of psychologically, it's to lower the cognitive dissonance around why we don't teach this stuff, like why Bucky for high school is kind of esoteric. But now, like, take this Dymaxion map. There's a lot of boomers who still think, oh, we're waiting for some pavilion or some, like, geoscope outside the UN. Like, they're still stuck on Bucky's actual proposals way back in the 60s or 70s, like that. And until those things happen, they think we're still waiting for them to happen. Of course, that's not true. I mean, these days, what would be easiest would be to just have, say, Google Earth, click a button and have it unfold into a fuller projection. I'm sure you've thought of that. And then you can zoom in. And then the question is, what layers do we want? Do we want to add the nationalistic layer of countries? So I'm doing some flag waving here. Anytime I want to do some flag waving, I have a bunch of flags here that I can wave. All countries I've been to and feel a lot of affection for. No, I don't have the U.S. flag there, but I could. But in the Fuller literature, the U.S. flag, we're kind of mixing it in with corporate aesthetics. The U.S. is very corporate, and we talk about the East India Company because the UK is very corporate, right? You talk about the corporate media. Well, with good reason. There is an oligarchy here. There always has been. Thomas Jefferson was an oligarch. The Masons, right? You got to look up this stuff. There's a lot of history, of course. So we'll teach some history, American history. We'll teach that Fuller got a Medal of Freedom from Ronald Reagan. Really, if you're ignorant of Fuller's trajectory and who he worked with and what his contribution was, don't get up in front of people calling yourself current affairs teacher or something like this. Like, they're all missing the boat paying high tuition. It's really not justifiable to bleep over all this stuff. And if you're doing that and then trying to smear Bucky and say, well, he's not really an architect, you're digging a deep hole for yourself. Good luck with that, right? Okay, the other thing to know, if you're in the Silicon Forest here, because of computer graphics and all that, and we're very much into design. If you're into design, you've got to know about polyhedra, and therefore you have to know certain concepts like what it means to take the dual of a polyhedron. We start with the platonics, and we take the duals, and then we combine duals and get to the rhombics, like the rhombic triconhedron, stuff like this. Rhombic dodecahedron, very important in our curriculum. Our doorway to crystallography. So you know all this. A lot of you have been hanging out, and this is all familiar material. And that's good. That's what I'm hoping, is that we spread the word and more teachers looking for content that hooks into the future in a positive way and not always like doom and gloom. Like, there are big challenges we need to face, and we're wasting time with tank wars and stuff. So, how do we get back on track? I think I'll end with my writing about Gen Alpha here. It's like, I still think the boomers have contribution to make, but I am concerned about how passing the torch has to happen, right? So the National Forensic League, going forward with this war that's being fought right now, this Eastern Eurasian war, I wouldn't call it Western, because the way I call West is Western Hemisphere. So I don't think of the UK or the British as being especially Western. They're very Eurasian over there. And so I would present Fuller as a deeply subversive writer in the American tradition. I would say he's not a Marxist, and therefore I would link him up in my writing with, say, Richard Rorty's Achieving Our Country, a small book, where Rorty comes out of the closet. He's a philosopher in the American pragmatist tradition. He's one of my professors. Richard Rorty, his book, Achieving Our Country, I would pull that out as sort of where to put Bucky in a straight line going back to the Transcendentalists, because they were also anti-imperialist, right? This idea of an American empire, a world-spanning empire, that's infantile, juvenile, British kind of thinking, right? We should look down on that. That's kind of why we fought a revolution, to not be caught up in that juvenile psyche of the Romans, which the Brits took over, made the Anglo-Saxons in general more stupid than they needed to be, if you want to talk about ethnicity. Not talking about race. Don't believe in race. So you got to pick up on all this. All these memes are kind of cool, and they link to each other. And of course we don't teach it in our culture, because Fuller was anti-mortgage. He didn't like the way we sell people dwellings. He had other ideas. And of course it's a threat to banking as we know it. So who's going to get funding from banks to teach the Bucky stuff, right? So already we're in trouble. But we're not, because we have the internet. We're doing great. Looking forward to our next meetup. Talk to you soon.